And here. Hello, everybody. Pete Caliendo. Welcome in the U.S. and around the world. You're on Baseball Outside the Box. I want to thank you, everybody on Zoom and also live on Facebook. Thanks for joining us for today's show. Going to be a great one. We have a lifer. This gentleman's been 6 decades in the game. Incredible. Former manager in the big leagues. He was the WBC World Baseball Classic manager with the USA team. Played in the big leagues as a catcher and currently the announcer, the color man for the Toronto Blue Jays. Not to mention, he wrote a book. We're going to talk about that book. Start off with the Kansas City Royals and an academy. He goes back a long time. What a great guy. And I tell you, first time I met him was in Belgium. When I was the Belgium coach, he was gracious enough, him and the Toronto Blue Jays, coming out with several of their guys, Bob Monbouquet, Pat Tabler, to help us train coaches. We had over 100 coaches in Belgium, and that was a great evening. So let me welcome a great person, great individual, super baseball mind, my friend, Buck Martinez. What's up, Buck?
Pete, great to be with you. Yeah, it was a long time ago. We were in Belgium. I know Pat Tabler, myself, Pat Gillick, Bill Monbouquet were all over there, and we bounced around from country to country. It was a great tour. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great. And obviously, and everybody, so you know, Buck's also done a lot internationally, worked with coaches. He played in Puerto Rico. I mean, he may have played some other places. And Buck, you know, this is a great time to start. And I want to get to, might as well start with your book, because, you know, what I love about it is, you know, how to make the great game of baseball even better. You know, so I think that's a great way to start. And then we'll take some questions. Give us an idea what you think about the game now. Obviously, you think it's a great game, but what are some ways to make it better? Let's get that ball rolling.
Well, Pete, first of all, the best way to make it better right now is get it back on the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to do that. And I know the commissioner's talking with managers today. They're trying to come up with a resolution and an idea of when they can get the game back on the field. And from all the people I've talked to, it sounds as though they're shooting for a June 10th spring training and hopefully a July 1st start. But that's all speculation at this point. But hopefully we'll hear something out of New York in the commissioner's conference call with the managers today. But getting back to your question about how do you make a great game better, obviously I love baseball. I've been in it 54 years professionally when I signed out of Sacramento City College in 1967 with the Phillies. And there are many aspects of the game that have changed dramatically since I first came into the game in 1969. And obviously the most dramatic was the fact that in 1969, there were 4 expansion teams. So baseball became a divisional game. East Coast, West Coast, East Division, West Division, and then 2 leagues. And in 1973, the DH came in. So there have been some dramatic changes over the years, and I've been involved in a lot of these changes. And now, most recently, of course, and I know he hates this phrase, but the Chase Utley rule on slides at second base. And he was a great player, long-time great player. I had the chance to manage him in 2006 with the WBC team. But now you can't take out a guy at second base. You can't take out a catcher at home plate. You can't throw at hitters. And all of these were parts of the game that the players controlled themselves. They always controlled it on the field. There's no doubt in my mind Chase Utley had no intention of hurting Ruben Tejada at second base on that slide. He had an intention of breaking up a double play and hopefully helping his team score a run. And, you know, I suffered the same injury as Buster Posey back in 1985 on the plate. I broke my leg and dislocated my ankle because I was blocking the plate. I didn't want Phil Bradley to score the run. And from that, it was just a situation where I had to block the plate, save the run, and do the best. And all those things are gone. So I think there are a lot of things that have been taken away from the game that create a lot of interest for the players. Breaking up a double play, great plays at home, and, knocking down batters back and forth. And I'm not an advocate for hitting batters. I'm certainly an advocate for making them uncomfortable.
You know, what about, as a catcher, you caught in the big leagues, things have changed there. I know one of the questions that came up right away on Facebook was, the question of, working with umpires as a catcher, that's, the communication with an umpire, the relationship, but also, the calling of the pitches, the how you set up, things have changed because you're studying umpires. What's the big difference there?
Well, Pete, there's been dramatic changes in that regard. Of course, now when you watch a major league game, catchers have cheat sheets on their forearm, just like NFL quarterbacks. So, and because of the sign stealing, we know all about Houston and Boston and their technology and how they stole signs with the help of technology. So pitchers and catchers are very paranoid about giving up their signs. So now catchers will wear cheat sheets on a forearm pad that will have 3 or 4 different series of signs. And oftentimes you'll see a pitcher on the mound hold up 2 fingers, meaning we're going to switch to sign number 2, set number 2. And they will change signs inning to inning, batter to batter, basically pitch by pitch sometimes because everybody's so paranoid. When I caught, I had to remember the scouting reports. I had to do all the homework myself. I had to make sure that that base runner at second base wasn't relaying the pitch to the batter. And that was my responsibility. And I took a lot of pride in protecting my pitchers and their pitches. But it's a different game now. There's so much technology, so much information. You can sit in front of a TV and decipher a set of signs in a matter of minutes. And that's what everybody is concerned about with this sign stealing situation with the Houston Astros. But that's one of the many changes that catchers have to deal with nowadays.
You know, what's your recommendation? That's an interesting point because of the pitch calling. What's your recommendation when it comes to developing younger players to become very good catchers? I know it's a progress to call pitches, but where do you start? How early should you start? As far as giving kids an opportunity to start calling pitches.
Well, it's a very challenging situation. And to be honest with you, I didn't really learn how to be a great catcher until about my 5th year in the majors.
Wow.
I had a great coach, Charlie Lau, who has gotten great and well-deserved credit for George Brett, Hal McRae, Joe Rudy as their hitting coach. Well, Charlie was a terrific pitching and catching coach, and he helped me develop into a good major league catcher by game calling, sequences, watching batters, watching tendencies, and all of that. It's very difficult. And obviously, when you start in the little leagues, the kids aren't throwing but 1 or 2 pitches, maybe a fastball, a curveball, and a changeup. So it's not really that involved. But when you start to get to high school, and of course, with all these travel teams, things become more sophisticated. So I would suggest, and I know the biggest thing is, especially in college coaches like to call pitches from the side. They're going to call all the pitches for the catcher. Well, I coached my son in college at Sacramento State for 3 years. I was a volunteer coach, and my friend John Smith was the head coach. And he said, "Hey, we want you to call pitches." And I was very reluctant to do that. I said, I don't really know what that previous pitch did. I don't know if it broke or if it backed up, if it was a good changeup or a bad changeup. I don't know where it was on the plate. I can tell height from the side, but I can't tell whether it was inside, on the inside corner, down the middle, or away. So that gives me no information to call the next pitch on. So it's very challenging. I tried it for a while, and I said, "John, this isn't working. Turn it over to the catchers. We will program and talk to the pitchers and catchers about strengths and weaknesses that they have and strengths and weaknesses of the hitters that we're going to face with rudimentary information." We didn't have great scouting reports, and we didn't, we watched a kid hit in batting practice, made a few adjustments and a few assessments, and then we would implement a scouting report. But I think for young kids, and I talked to Charles Johnson about this, and Charles was a great catcher in college, great amateur catcher, played Team USA and all of that. Charles told me that he had no idea how to call a game when he signed professional contract because he played at the University of Miami. Everything was called for him. He would simply look into the dugout. He had to be a good sign reader, read the sign from the coach on the bench, make the pitch, and have no idea how that pitch interacted with the previous pitch or the next pitch. I always thought 2 and 3 pitches ahead of time. If I call a fastball and get a strike, I've got the opportunity to call a breaking ball or a changeup. If I get a ball, I've got to call another fastball to get a strike to get back into the count. All of these things that you think about. And I think, and obviously, catching is the most difficult position to coach. First of all, not a lot of people know a lot about the position. I had 2 great catching coaches in Charlie Lau and John Sullivan. John Sullivan was a longtime minor league manager with the Royals and became my major league coach, and then became my coach in Toronto as well. But for these young kids, it's difficult to teach them how to call a game unless you allow them to think about it. Mm-hmm. They have to have the feel of it. Catching is all about feel. I don't care how much information you give them. You have to understand that Rod Carew was late swinging at that last pitch, and I can throw him the same pitch, and that can be an effective pitch because he can't all of a sudden make up that time trying to get to the next fastball. So there's so much that I used to read, and all the catchers used to read about a particular pitch to give you information for the next pitch. And I think you can't sit down and program a pitch and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to throw these guys, this next batter, 5 pitches, and I know each one of them that I'm going to throw before he steps in the box. That doesn't work because every pitch creates a different situation for the next pitch.
You know, those are great points. And you mentioned volunteer coaches. God bless volunteer coaches in the U.S. around the world. I want to thank you for being volunteers, but do me a favor, please try to get as educated as possible to help these young people because they just want to have a lot of fun and understand how the game's played. You know, and one thing I noticed, Buck, nowadays, you know, young kids, they're not allowed to play the game on their own. They can't make decisions on their own. They, you know, they want to take an extra base. Somebody's going to tell them to do it, even though the ball's in front of them. You know, you want to make a decision. They can't do it. Catching is a great example. Why not start them earlier and let them make some mistakes, especially in practice games? I would think that would help them more.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll agree with you, too. And I want to say something about volunteer coaches. You know, the backbone of my baseball career started in the sandlots of Sacramento. And Sacramento had so many great leagues and coaches, and it was just well known. I mean, I grew up playing with guys like Larry Boa and John Vukovich and Dusty Baker and Bob Oliver, and we were kids playing the game that we loved so much. But there were always scouts and coaches around, the great Ronnie King and Bill Avila, and I had a major league pitcher that pitched a little while in the big leagues, Charlie Shantz, as my winter league coach. And we played year round and we played games. I would play on 2 and 3 teams at a time. I'd play a game on Saturday, play a game Sunday morning, play a game Sunday afternoon. I just played a lot. I never had any formal instruction, not until I got to the big leagues.
When did you start catching?
When I was 8.
Oh, you started right away. Wow.
I was genetically restricted.
Yeah.
I was a little fat kid.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. The guy that gave me my first protective cup was my Little League coach, Johnny Crotto.
And you remember the names. Wow.
Oh, yeah. He was in Redding, California. I was 8 years old. And he gave me a protective cup. I had no idea what it was. He said, here. He said, you're going to catch. I said, okay, what do I do with this? He said, your dad will show you what to do with it. So I became a catcher. And then I was playing with 12-year-olds. Back then, we didn't have, you know, Pee-wee and minor and everything else. I played Little League from 8 to 12. And I played with a bunch of big 12-year-olds. And one game early on, I got hit right in the stomach while I was batting. And I turned into the pitch. I just kind of turned into the pitch, closed my eyes, and hit me right in the stomach. Well, that was it. I was quitting baseball. I was done with it. I hate this game. It hurts. So my father was a very wise man. He says, well, I'll let you quit, but you have to tell your coach why you're going to quit. So my mom washed my uniform, made a nice pile. I put my hat on top along with my protective cup, took it back to my coach, and I said, Coach, I don't want to play anymore. He said, why? I said, because I got hit and I just don't like the game. He goes, I think you're going to be a very good player, and I want you to stay with us and play. I think you'll have a fun time. And he basically talked me into playing.
Wow.
And I came back and I played, but that's the impact volunteer coaches can have. You know what? When you're playing as a kid, it's the first relationship you have with the sport, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, hockey, lacrosse, whatever. When these volunteer coaches have a chance to coach a 9, 10, 11-year-old, you're going to make a lasting impression. And the challenge that I throw to you is make it fun for the kids. Mm-hmm. They're all not going to be big leaguers. There's only been 19,000 major leaguers in the history of the game. So they're all not going to be big leaguers. They're all not going to get college scholarship, and they all might only play through Little League. But make it fun for them. Make it something they look forward to doing. And I know that's a challenge because kids, all they want to do is hit. They want to hit, they want to hit, they want to hit. When so much of the game is about fundamentals of catching and throwing and base running and playing defense, and they want to hit. But it's a challenge. It was a challenge for me as a manager in the big leagues because Carlos Delgado and Jose Cruz Jr. and Raul Mondesi and Shannon Stewart, they wanted to hit.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to get them to get better. So, yeah, it's a challenge. But I applaud the volunteer coaches, and I echo Pete's thoughts about that.
You know, and we're going to get to the book and some of the things that you talk about in the book. But I want to take a question from Coach Birmingham, Pete Birmingham, high school and college coach. He talks about when you were playing in the big leagues, you know, when you caught pitches, what did you do to help the umpire? What did you do to have a good relationship with the umpire?
That's a great question. And you know what? I go visit the umpires every day when I broadcast. So I'll go to the umpires room before the game and come in and say, is there anything I should know that, you know, you guys are talking about, concerns or anything about what you guys are doing? And the umpires, you know, there are not many of them that are still umping that I worked with, but some of the supervisors are still umping. And they always said, this guy was always fair with us. And that's the biggest thing. Be fair, be understanding, and try to just communicate with the umpire. I'll tell you a quick story. I had spent my career in the American League with the Royals before I got traded to Milwaukee in 1978. And I went to Milwaukee in spring training, and I'm catching one of the first games in spring training, and a National League umpire, Doug Harvey, who they called Lord, he was a terrific umpire for a long time. And I was a veteran player. I played 8 years in the big leagues. And I caught a pitch, and I thought it was a strike. And I said, gee, Doug, I thought that was a pretty good pitch. He goes, son, that was a quarter-inch outside. I said, well, okay, now I know who's in charge. It's Doug Harvey.
Yeah.
But it's all about communication. I mean, nobody gets anything by ranting and raving and throwing a fit. You get things accomplished by communicating. And I think my biggest asset, and which has helped me a lot in broadcasting and managing as well, was the fact that I worked closely with an umpire every single day of my career. I would sit back there, we'd start the game, hey, how you doing today? Everything going all right? I would tell him about my pitcher. I would say, this guy's got a great slider, don't give up on it. It breaks late, it's gonna look like a ball, and then it'll be a strike, but tell him things about the pitcher to include him into my game plan. And I did that as well with the umpires when I was managing. I had a player named Felipe Lopez, who was a very fast, very athletic player. And he would get called out before the umpire really saw the play, because he would beat many plays on routine grounders because they assumed it was a routine grounder, he was going to be out. So during my meeting at home plate prior to the game, I would say, do me a favor. Take an extra beat to look at Felipe Lopez on bang-bang plays at first, because he beats a lot of throws. And because it's a routine play, people have a tendency to assume that he's going to be out. So just those types of communication are always important. Go up to the umpire, introduce yourself. Hey, how you doing today? Nice to see you. Let's try to have a great game today. Anything I can do to help you out? Am I sitting too high, sitting too low? Am I moving a little bit too much? Just let me know how I can help you have a good game. And that's a great part of trying to help umpires and catchers have a great relationship.
You know, you talk about also, how about receiving? Were there things you did to kind of help the umpire when it came to receiving?
Well, you know, that's a big pet peeve of mine. And all the people that broadcast with me know how much I hate the word framing.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the biggest contrived things in the game today, because guys have great framing metrics. And one of the examples I'll give you is, I can't even think of his name now.
St. Louis Cardinals catcher?
No, the catcher, Yasmani Grandal. Yasmani Grandal, great catcher, got a nice contract with the White Sox, free agent catcher, and he's very highly ranked in framing. And if you'll remember, in 16 and 17 or 17 and 18 at the World Series, he didn't catch. But his metrics said he was a great framer. Well, why didn't he catch? Because he had trouble on tough pitches, and they would get by him. He had pass balls against the Brewers in the playoff game they had. He had a real tough game in the World Series and didn't catch a lot. So these framing metrics, I think, are just another tool for all the analytics to just have another tool to grade somebody. Your eyes will tell you when a catcher's good. But to your point about what I did as a catcher, I used to catch all the bullpens in spring training. I'd catch everybody, make sure I'd catch 7 or 8 guys every day in the bullpen. And then practice. Each pitcher's ball has a little different movement, but try to minimize the movement of your glove and not jerk it back into the strike zone. They call that framing. To me, that's a red flag to the umpires. And umpires will tell you the same thing. If you move that glove, that's telling the umpire that you didn't think it was a strike.
Mm-hmm.
If I receive the ball with confidence and receive it and keep my glove quiet, that is a positive message that I thought it was a good pitch, and you might get a better call from an umpire. But when you start moving the glove around a lot and trying to put it in the strike zone when it's not, I've had umpires tell me, hey, you're moving a little too much. And you're trying to bring balls into the strike zone. They're not balls. And the framing thing really gets me, because balls and strikes are called on where the ball is before the catcher catches them, right?
Yes.
So how does framing impact the ball or strike thing?
Yeah. How do you think when it comes to the electronic strike zone, when it comes in, you a fan of that, or you think it's going to help, hurt? What's the?
Boy, Pete, you're digging deep now.
We're getting deep. Yeah, we're going to get deep here.
If you're going to have an electronic strike zone, why not put a pitching machine out on the mound?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
I mean, that's another part of the game. That's the beauty of the game. The game lasted for 125 years without all these dramatic changes. And it was always a very popular game. So now people are telling us what's wrong with the game. There was nothing wrong with the game. Just play the game. People say, well, games are too long now. You know why games are too long? Because commercials are 2 minutes and 45 seconds long. So you have 5 minutes of commercials every inning over the course of 9 innings. That's 45 minutes. So that's why games are longer. We didn't have commercials when I started playing because we didn't have games on TV. Once a week, you had Saturday game of the week. Games played at 2 hours. Boom, 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 boom. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the game. But I certainly think that bringing in, and I know the umpires have been forced into kind of agreeing on the research about automated strike zone, but I think that would be a big mistake.
You know, we're getting to some questions in a second, ladies and gentlemen. One more thing about catchers. Also, you're seeing a lot of different stances now. 1 knee, 2 knees. You're seeing, low, high. I mean, just different stances. Talk about what you've seen and what you think about some of those stances, why they're doing that.
Well, Pete, I think, as I mentioned earlier, catching in my mind is the most difficult position to coach because a lot of people don't really understand the catching. And we've had Pudge Rodriguez at 5'8". We've had Carlos Ruiz at 5'8". We've had Carlton Fisk at 6'5". Sandy Alomar Jr. at 6'5". Gary Carter was 6'4". A lot of big guys have been able to catch to a Hall of Fame standard. So I don't think there's any one way to catch, whatever makes you comfortable. Think about Craig Biggio. He started out as a catcher, played second base, played center field, all on a regular basis. It wasn't like he was a utility player. He was a full-time catcher, a full-time second baseman, and a full-time center fielder. So he was athletic as hell. So he could get back there and catch and be very active. Russell Martin's another great example of a guy that started out as an infielder, but because he was so athletic, he moved behind the plate. And you would never really teach Russell Martin mechanics behind the plate because he was so athletic. He was 5'9", 5'10", could move around like crazy, and he would literally start moving before he would catch the ball when he was throwing a runner at second base. Pat Borders is another great example of a guy. Pat was an MVP in the World Series for the Blue Jays. Well, Pat started out as a third baseman. He was terrible. Then they tried him at first base. They tried him at DH. And it was only upon Pat's own suggestion, hey, let me try catching, that he became a catcher. And he worked so hard, and he was very athletic, and he didn't do things by the textbook. But he caught the ball, pitchers had confidence in him, and he could throw. And he became an MVP in the World Series. So I don't think there's any one way to do things. I think because velocity is up, there's no question about it. Pitchers are throwing harder than they ever have. You have to be able to make adjustments on the fly according to your own physique. You know, a coach can't sit over there and say, you got to catch this way. If I were coaching young kids, I would say, we want to make sure you keep your mask directly toward the pitcher so you don't expose yourself on the side of your head. You want to keep relatively square to the pitcher as well. But however you can catch the ball with the least movement in the most fluid motion, you go ahead and do that. And I'll be here to help you make some adjustments during the course. But I don't think you can say you have to squat down like this, your feet have to be shoulder width apart, you have to put one hand behind your back, and all of that. I think you have to allow a kid to fall in love with a position. Because when you think about it, think about how many managers have been former catchers, how many broadcasters have been former catchers, because it's a position where you're involved in every single pitch of the game. You have communication with the umpire, you have communication with the manager, you communicate with the pitching coach, you communicate with the infield coach, you communicate with your pitcher, all the infielders, and even the outfielders. So the catchers have the best perspective to pass the game along to players, to viewing audiences, and to coaches and managers.
You know, that brings up a great point. Victor Castillo from Mexico, and in Chicago, we have, I think we have an incredible catcher, Wilson Contreras, very athletic. And the question Victor has, do you think that, and I think you answered part of this, do you think the catcher should be the best athlete and the smartest player on the field? I'm not sure how you dictate that, but, you know, should he be the best? You're seeing more and more athletes being catchers now?
Yes, and I think another guy to put in that category is JT Realmuto, the Phillies. He was a former wrestler. His family has been long involved in collegiate wrestling, and he's very athletic and made transition. Jorge Posada made the transition from an infielder to a catcher. Catching is an athletic position. You know, you used to think of catchers like being big slugs like Ernie Lombardi. You know, in 250 pounds, he'd sit back there, he didn't run, he'd squat, go down to one knee and catch and everything else. Well, catching is a very athletic position. When you think about all the great catchers, how quick they move. We talked about Pudge Rodriguez and Carlos Ruiz and Jim Sundberg and Bob Boone. And if you remember Bob Boone, he was a big guy, but he was very agile and very flexible, and he would bend down. But as far as being the smartest man on the field, I don't know if that's ever going to be the case, but you certainly have to understand your role. Everybody focuses on the catcher on every pitch. And I always used to tell my catchers, play with energy, play with enthusiasm, play with excitement, because that excitement is going to translate to the entire team. Everybody on the field is going to feel that same excitement. If you're lobbing the ball back to the mound and you're hanging your head and you're taking your mask off and look like you don't want to be there, that's going to translate into your team's personality. When you think about Pudge Rodriguez and Carlos Ruiz and Realmuto and all those guys, the fiery catchers, Contreras has that. It's about enthusiasm, energy, and that is passed on to the rest of your team. So I would encourage all your young catchers to be the leader, to be the vocal guy. You know, Michael Barrett was another guy in Chicago that was one of those guys. A.J. Brzezinski, another terrific example of a guy. And he was always a leader, very vocal. And I'll tell you a quick story about A.J. He got upset at me as I was broadcasting one of his games, and Ed Farmer, unfortunately, Ed passed away recently, but Ed Farmer and I were teammates in Milwaukee and in winter ball. And Ed was doing the radio for the White Sox, and on the air, I said, A.J. Brzezinski is baseball's version of Dennis Rodman. He gets under your skin, and all he ever cares about is beating you.
Yeah.
And AJ confronted me the next day. He says, hey, what is that stuff you're saying about me being like Dennis Rodman? I said it in a complimentary fashion because I applaud Dennis Rodman, his ability to win championships, and I feel you're the same type of guy. The other team hates you. Your team loves you, and all you do is win, and that's all you're concerned about. So, yeah, I mean, there's leaders and characteristics of leaders that are common in great catchers.
And I think that's why there are some great managers that are catchers. And it leads into a perfect question from Warren Phillips, who is from Thunder Bay, Canada, a place I coached in the independent leagues. And and also they hosted the WBSC World Championships for 18U. Warren, he mentions, what is it about the qualities inherent in catchers that make them apparently so well suited for managing? And you talked about some.
We talked a little bit about that, but a lot of people have mentioned that. And Dusty Baker and I talk about this all the time. Dusty and I grew up together in Sacramento, and of course, our careers kind of coincided with each other. Dusty and I played winter ball. We roomed together in Puerto Rico. And he said the one thing that he regrets he didn't do on a baseball field, and Dusty's done just about everything, is catch. He said the catchers are the only ones on the field that have an overall front view of the game. Everything to a catcher is in front of them. If you're a pitcher, you've got players behind you. If you're a third baseman or first baseman, the team is to the side. Outfielders, they're looking in, but the catcher has everything in front of him. You see spacing of the field. You see balls getting through the defense. You see positioning of your defenders. You see the flight of the ball, the path of the bat, communicate with umpires. It's because you understand and see and have a relationship with everything that happens on a baseball field. And it's not a coincidence that so many catchers have turned to managing, and more so have turned to broadcasting after their managing or playing days are over.
I can see that also in the broadcasting. And the other part, what about when they make, and Warren mentions this, when they make very good pitching coaches? They've called games. They understand pitchers. I mean, you would think they would. I mean, with the exception of, the actual teaching of the movements of the body and all that.
Yes. One of the best pitching coaches in the history of the game is Dave Duncan. Mm-hmm. And Dave Duncan caught for the Oakland A's, and he caught for Baltimore, and he was just a terrific defensive catcher. He caught for Cleveland, and Dunk became a great pitching coach. And with the A's, with Tony La Russa, he and Tony La Russa, as you know, in Chicago, they were all together there in Chicago, and then they went to St. Louis and established that great organization in St. Louis. But you're right. I mean, once again, you talk about a catcher being involved in everything, and Duncan turned careers around. Chris Carpenter, who was with the Blue Jays early on, went to St. Louis and raved about what Dave Duncan did for his career. But there are more stories, and Bobby Forsch was there, Adam Wainwright was there, and became a great pitcher under the guidance of Dave Duncan, who, in fact, was a catcher.
Folks, if you're on Zoom, just a recommendation, if you want to ask a question, if you don't want to type it in the chat, you can ask a question to Buck by just, you can open your video, your mic. I can see that you want to ask a question. We'll let you ask that question. Buck, this is going to sound a little strange because it's kind of like in the games, when kid's hitting and somebody yells, watch the ball. And you're thinking, well, what do you mean watch the ball? That's what I'm trying to do. And if I'm 12 years old, that's going to be my response. But as a catcher, that ball's coming so fast. It's like tracking and hitting. You don't have time to move the glove too much. What did you look at to identify the pitch? Now, you knew the type of pitch coming. Well, where did you look so that way you could pick it up as early as possible? Any tips in that area?
Yeah, the one thing, too, it helps a lot, and it's all about tension in your hands. And what I used to do is I would hold my target hand up, hold my glove up with the target, and as the pitcher was in his windup, just before he got to his release point, I would relax my hand and slightly turn it. Now this gives me the flexibility to react to the pitch wherever it's gone. I'm going to focus on the release point, just like a hitter would focus at the plate. He's going to try to pick up that ball as quickly as he can from that pitcher's release point. And at that point, I have dropped my glove. Now I'm in the most relaxed position, and I can move my glove to the point where I have to make the catch. So it's all about relaxing, tension, and the same thing at the plate. You want to take all the tension out of that first movement, and that's how I did it. Setting up for a pitch. You mentioned, I know what's coming. I know where I expect it to be, but obviously every pitcher can't hit his spot pitch after pitch after pitch. So you have to be ready to make the adjustments for a pitch that wasn't executed properly.
All right. It'd be great to jump to the book that you have called Change Up, How to Make the Great Game of Baseball Even Better. You talk about in the book a lot of different things, but one of them is your time together as a team. You don't see players spending time together, building that relationship, the chemistry, People use the word chemistry a lot, but talk about that. What does it really take? What is chemistry, and why aren't guys spending time together?
Well, I think the biggest reason is economics, Pete. When you think about it, when I broke into the game in 1969, my salary for the season was $10,000. So families who were rookies in the major leagues had to figure out how to live on $10,000. Of course, it was 50 years ago, and it was a lot different economically then. But we had to live in the same apartment complex. We had to carpool. The wives would have the carpool to the game. Kids would oftentimes spend hours and days with teammates' families. So we became very close. We would have potluck dinners. We would work out together in the off season. Everybody stayed very close. Plus, we weren't free agents. If you were a Royal, you were always a Royal. Until 76, you didn't have the ability to move around. So when you signed with the Royals, you're going to be in the minor leagues together. You're going to go up to the different levels of the minor leagues together. You're going to go to the big leagues together, and you became very close. And that was part of the chemistry, because you were always a Royal. And what happened then was the only thing you cared about was winning for the Royals. Then with the advent of free agency, not only did the salaries increase dramatically, but the movement changed dramatically. You were no longer tied because of the reserve clause. You had the ability to go from team to team. I went from Kansas City to Milwaukee, from Milwaukee to Toronto. So you don't have those long-term relationships that you once had. And it's a special team that can build chemistry that way. But I'll say this, if you look at the championship teams of the last 15 or 20 years, every one of those teams had a majority of core players that were homegrown players. Those players set the personality of that team, whether it was the Angels in 2002 or the Marlins in 2003, the White Sox in 2005. The majority of those players were homegrown players, and they set the personality for that team. And whenever anybody came in, they had to adapt to the White Sox personality. And there's no greater example than the New York Yankees in the core four, which was actually core five when you count Bernie Williams into it, because he was a big part of it as well. But you had Jeter, Posada, Rivera, Pettit, and Bernie Williams. They were Yankees, and they were the ones that set the personality of that team, and that's how they built their chemistry for that long haul.
And go ahead.
The Braves had 14 division series in a row. Bobby Cox was the general manager early on, developed the farm system, created a deep farm system, recognized the team was pretty good, and named himself manager. A brilliant move.
That was awesome. Being in Chicago, I look at the Chicago Cubs when they rebuilt. It's exactly what they did. A lot of their, number one picks are all they're all homegrown guys and most of their lineup were homegrown guys. I'm sorry?
Houston did the same thing.
Houston, yep. And what's your recommendation to coaches to build that relationship among players, among a team? When you're talking about a travel team, high school, college, what are some recommendations that they can help build relationships for that team?
It's a very challenging situation in this game today, Pete, because as you know, there are so many different travel teams and showcases and elite teams, area code games, and things like that, where only the elite players get invited. And you might play with 10 different guys over the course of a summer. So you don't really have that relationship that we used to have when you played on one team. You played the whole season with the same guys, and you played next year with the same guys, and the next year with the same guys, whether it was Little League, Babe Ruth, American Legion, college, into minor leagues early in my career. So I think it's challenging, but at the same time, I think you have to create a uniform goal. We're going to be the best team we can be, and we're going to help out each other the best we can. And not everybody is going to play the position where they're most comfortable. You're going to have to make some adjustments. And I think what you do in that sense, when somebody's upset about not playing shortstop or second or center field, you point to the major leagues and say, look how versatile the players in the major leagues are now. They're developing super utility players like Marwin Gonzalez, guys that play all over the diamond. They play every day, but they have the ability to play multiple positions.
Absolutely. One thing I know that, and I love about you is that, you tell it the way it is, and you don't worry about it. And one that you've talked about, which is tough in nowadays, is, you mentioned, today where it's all about being flashy and hitting home runs, and, we're forgetting about playing the game. And I agree with you, because I also talk about, if you look at the teams that win the World Series in the last few years, they hit the ball everywhere, where they weren't just home run hitters. I mean, they moved the ball around a little bit. So talk about that.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I talk to managers all the time in my role as a play-by-play announcer, and I'll go down and sit with them early in the day, talk about their team, and Buck Showalter, Joe Girardi, Bruce Bochy, the quote-unquote old school guys will sit around and talk, and Buck Showalter, everybody knows what the perception is of Buck and his stern military type of attitude. And when he was in Baltimore, they had a pretty good team early on. They had J.J. Hardy, and they had Adam Jones, and they had Chris Davis, a lot of good players, and they, battled the Blue Jays into that great wild card game a few years ago. But I asked Buck about the flamboyant celebrations, the bat flips, and the strikeout dances, and the shoot the players, and all that celebration. He said, that used to really bother me as a manager. He said, but nowadays, I look down at the dugout and I look at the reaction of my players, and I figure if it doesn't bother them, it sure as hell shouldn't bother me. So that's how he kind of handles it now, because nowadays it's all about players developing a brand.
Sure.
Everybody's an individual. Bautista's terrific bat flip in the playoffs in 15 is an iconic moment in Canadian history, sports history, not just baseball. And, at the time, there was nothing wrong with it, given the situation of that particular inning. But I think, old school baseball folks are going to have to get over that. Well, he's showing up the other team. Well, they're not showing up the other team. They're celebrating something that they thought was pretty important. And players don't seem to have a problem with it. When they do have a problem with it, they settle it on the field. And I think that's the way you need to let them handle it. But it's much different. Obviously, when I play, the guy ahead of me might hit a home run. I would get knocked down as the next batter.
Right.
It's a different game and a different time. And all they were saying is, don't get too comfortable. Don't think that you're going to dig in and hit another home run after that one. But it was about keeping a hitter off balance. Nobody tried to hit you intentionally in those cases. I mean, there were many, many pitchers that tried to hit you intentionally to intimidate you. But, it was part of the game. And now it's just something that's lost. And the game is probably better because of it. But I think managers nowadays understand players are going to show off. Players are allowed now to wear colorful shoes and wear colorful gloves. And I think the audience enjoys that. I think they like the personalities.
Something that's changed at the major league level, which unfortunately it's filtering down to the young levels. And I get it at the major league level. There's a lot of statistics, so you've got some proof that some things don't work, but we're not seeing a lot of bunting. And I understand you got a man on first, you're going to bunt him over. You gave away an out. Why'd you do it so early? And the percentage of scoring is going to be a lot less, but they're less bunting. You don't see as much stealing. Now, the problem is, at the younger levels, that's a whole different ballgame. Why not? And some people are stopping bunting. They're not bunting anymore. They're not practicing bunting. They're taking it away from the game. What's your thoughts there?
Well, I think everybody thinks that all of those players are going to be major league players.
Yeah.
And what they say is, well, they don't bunt in the big leagues. Why should we bunt here? Because winning has been de-emphasized. And I think the only person who really concerned about wins and losses deep down are the managers. They're the only ones that have wins and loss records. And I think for the youngsters, it's difficult because they watch so much TV. They watch so many replays, and they see the players. Nobody bunts, nobody steals bases. But in the 70s and 80s, that was such an important part of the game. You had guys stealing 80 to 100 bases a year. Teams now won't steal 50 bases in a year. But it's a different game, and it's been analyzed out of the game, Pete. I had Raul Mondesi, Shannon Stewart, Jose Cruz Jr., Vernon Wells, who could all run like crazy. My general manager says, I don't want you to steal. I said, I'm not stopping them. That's part of their game.
Wow.
Yeah. And then that particular night that he told me that Mondesi stole home.
Yeah. Now, if you were the development director, you're developing young athletes and at the younger levels, minor league ball. What were some things that you would do differently to develop athletes nowadays, and maybe even some things that we may be doing wrong?
Yeah, no. The first thing I would do is I would bring back infield practice. I would bring that aspect back, and it's something you don't see. And I don't know how Major League Baseball fans haven't rebelled from this before, because they will literally sit for 1 hour after the visiting team has taken batting practice and nothing goes on the field. Zero. The grounds crew is watering the diamond, they're putting down the lines, and nothing goes on. Years ago, teams used to take infield right up until 20 minutes before the game. So you could see Willie Mays and Ollie Brown and Dave Parker throw from the outfield, Jesse Barfield, Al Cowens, great arms. They would show off during infield practice. What it also does, it hones your skills every single day. Fundamentals are horrible now in the major leagues. There aren't anybody that have standout arms. There aren't any catchers that throw consistently. And, there's only a handful of defensive players where you say, wow, that guy's a defensive whiz, because they don't practice every day. That's the first thing I would bring back. The second thing I would do would be enforce and improve the contact rate. People don't hit the ball enough anymore, and that's why the game has been characterized as boring. A lot of fans, and good baseball fans, say nothing happens anymore. There's no hitting and running, there's no stealing, there's no bunting, because everybody wants to see a home run. Well, not everybody wants to see a home run. I'd love to see the Vince Coleman Cardinals play, the Ozzie Smith Cardinals play, hit and run. The Royals in the early 70s, they were a mad dash running team, hitting and run. Hal McRae, George Brett, Al Cowens, Frank White. We went first to third, first to home better than anybody in baseball. But you don't see that anymore. I would bring that back. I would bring back big wood bats, 36-inch bats. Give it to a little guy and say, hey, choke up, make contact. They're playing 3 infielders on one side of the diamond. Can't you hit it through that hole on the other side and get a base hit? I would encourage bat control, contact, putting the ball in play, line drives. And because of the analytical world and all the information out there, everybody's created the launch angle. Well, the launch angle has created strikeouts. You think about a guy, now he hits 30 home runs. Everybody hits 30 home runs. Who cares? Give me a team that wins. And if you think about the World Series, and you mentioned it, Washington Nationals won the World Series because they had great starting pitching, and Anthony Rendon made an adjustment and got a ground ball base hit through the right side of the infield when they were playing him in the shift. And people made adjustments. And the game is about adjustments. You can't script a baseball game. You have to be able to make adjustments on the fly. And I would practice with my kids to teach them how to make contact, to teach them how to fundamentally play the game better, to increase their arm strength. I would have them throw every single day. I used to throw 2 infields a day. If I was catching, I would catch in the infield, and then I would go to third base for the second infield. If I was not catching, I would throw from left field and then come and catch the second round of infield. We'd take 2 infields every day up until the end of my career, 1986. And everybody had a good arm, everybody could throw, and everybody had arm strength.
I'm so happy you talked about the throwing every day, because kids aren't doing enough of that. I know, and it's you're seeing in the development a lot of young kids, they're just not getting strong enough when it comes to throwing. Something we talk about on the show a lot, and I've been to Japan about 25 times. I love the Japanese style from the standpoint of what you're talking about. They play a lot, they practice a lot, they play catch a lot. Their pitches per at bat, if you look at the major league hitters that come up that have played in the big leagues from Japan, their pitches per at bat are higher than most major leaguers. I'm going to take a question. Let's do this because we got a couple questions. Warren Phillips says, and then we all know that you played in Puerto Rico. Did you see then the beginning of Puerto Rico developing so many great catchers? What was the turning point there when you were in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I did see a lot of those great catchers. I played in Puerto Rico for 4 years. I played 2 years in Santurce, 1 year in Arecibo, 1 year in Mayagüez. And that's when winter ball was major league quality baseball. To give you an idea, in 1970, I played for Santurce. Frank Robinson was my manager. Reggie Jackson was my right fielder. Don Baylor was the center fielder. Orlando Cepeda played first base. Tony Perez played third base. And this is my team on winter ball. It's not the league. It's not an all-star team. That was just my team, Santurce. But major leaguers supplemented their income, stayed sharp. Reggie hit 47 home runs in 69 in the majors for Oakland. He hit 20 home runs in winter ball because he was having a contract dispute with Charlie Finley. He came down to play winter ball for Frank Robinson. Don Baylor and Roger Freed were the minor league players of the year. The previous year in the minors, they played left field and center field respectively. Jose Cruz was playing in the league. There were great players all over. But as far as the catchers had the benefit of watching great catchers. There was Ellie Rodriguez, who was my teammate in 1969 in Kansas City. He was the all-star for the Royals in 69. And Hector Valle before him. But then there were Benito Santiago, the Alomars, then the Molinas, then Pudge Rodriguez, and it was just on and on and on. A lot of great catchers, and they all looked up to these players. So, when you look at the Molinas, there were three of them caught in the big leagues. There was Sandy Alomar and Benito Santiago and Pudge Rodriguez. And now, of course, everybody looks at Pudge Rodriguez as the iconic Puerto Rican catcher, but there were many great catchers that came from Puerto Rico at that time, including Jorge Posada, who we talked about earlier.
I'm going to take also Mr. Castillo, Victor Castillo. He basically wants to know the complete catcher, the guy that does it all, leadership, throwing, batting, you name it. Who would you pick as your complete catcher right now?
Playing in a game today?
Yeah, or anytime.
Well, it's so difficult. As far as the complete catcher, Gary Carter would have to be the guy that you would think about because he had a strong arm. But, the best all-time catcher in my mind is no doubt Johnny Bench. Mm-hmm. Johnny Bench revolutionized the position because he used a glove with a break. And he was one of the first guys that went to what we call the one-handed catcher. He had a cannon for an arm. People wouldn't even think about running against him. He was a great hitter with power. He was a leader. He was 19 years old when he got to the big leagues. He, to me, is the best all-time catcher because he had all those attributes. But then, too, when you think about his career, it really dropped off because of the beating he took playing every single day. And I think anytime you have a Gary Carter or Mike Piazza, Bob Boone, any of those guys that played a long time, Carlton Fisk, I don't want to forget him, it was remarkable because they played every day and they still hit. They had foul balls off the thumbs. They got hit in the shoulders. They were always beat up, but they still hit and played every day.
If you had to rate the skills of a catcher, number 1 to 4, or what would that be? What would you be number one skill?
For me, the number one skill of a catcher is to gain the confidence of his pitching staff. When a pitcher looks in and gets a sign, he's got total confidence in that pitch, and he's going to throw it with the most conviction of any pitch he's thrown. So winning the confidence of your pitching staff, to me, is number one. The second, it would be the physical aspect of blocking balls in the dirt. So a pitcher, once again, has confidence. He can throw his best splitter or his best curveball. If he happens to bounce it, that catcher is going to block it. So that would be number two. Throwing, as we mentioned, is not as emphasized anymore because base stealers don't run.
Right.
But then you want him to be a hitter. You'd like him to be one of those guys that's athletic, like JT Realmuto, that can hit third or fourth in your lineup. Then you have the best of both worlds, because for years, the catching position was a guy that batted eighth or ninth in the American League, did a good job catching. Whatever he did with the bat was a bonus. But now, when you have a player like Realmuto that can give you everything, or Busty Posey that can give you both, I think then you have a real bonus because you can add different attributes to the offense at different positions.
As you know, pitch counts have been added in the game at the younger levels. It started off actually in high school. Nationally now, every state has that rule. What's your opinion of pitch counts?
Pitch counts is such a difficult thing because everybody is different. I mean, I had guys I played with when they were 12 years old that had basically already matured. They didn't get any bigger. They didn't get any stronger. And he could throw it, you know, as hard as anybody, as long as he wanted to. But he never got any better. Pitch count, I think, is an individual thing. Johnny Padres, a longtime pitching coach for Jim Fregosi with the Phillies, Fregosi used to ask, how many pitches does he have? And Padres' response was, not enough. And it was just the fact, every game is different. I mean, Maddox always talks about this. He said, I can throw 80 pitches in a nothing game and be worn out. Or I can throw 135 pitches free and easy and not have the same kind of wear and tear. So I don't think anybody can set a standard as baseball has now and say, 100 pitches, that's it. Because everybody gets to 85 pitches and starts to think about being out of the game. I think we have created a 5-inning world now, and I don't think it's necessary. Pitchers are better athletes. They're in better shape. They take better care of themselves. They eat better. I think whatever you do, if a miler was going to run a mile, he would run 5 miles for practice. So pitchers need to pitch more. I'll tell you a quick story about Jack Morris. 1984, Tigers get off to a 35-5 start. I was playing in Toronto. We could never catch him. Morris pitched 3 complete games in spring training before the season started. He pitched 6 games in April that year, 5 complete games, and a no-hitter in April. He was ready to start the season. Nowadays, pitchers come out, they might have great stuff. You got to take him out of the game because he wasn't ready to throw 125 pitches. It's a disservice to the game. You don't want to see the pitching matchup, opener against opener. You want to see Gibson against Drysdale. You want to see Strasburg against Cole. You want to see Marquis Verlander against CC Sabathia. You don't want to see openers pitch 5 innings or 2 innings or whatever. I think baseball has created itself a problem because of that.
You know, you mentioned Greg Maddox. He just recently said, he goes, spring training, you have 6 weeks, because they're talking about, coming back, how they're going to come back quick. He said 6 weeks is way too much. I mean, I don't need that much time.
No, they get bored. Then you know what? You get bored, then you're not focused on things. I think we used to play 12 to 15 games in spring training. We'd go down the 1st of March. You wouldn't play a game till the 10th of March. You'd break camp by the end of March. You start the season early April. And I think, once again, everything is about money, Pete, no matter what you do. Politics, life, economics, it's all about money. And they need 31 games in spring training for fans to come in and pay some of the bills.
You think this show would almost be script because you talk about money. Major League Baseball is talking about cutting back minor league teams. Talk about that.
Yeah. And you know what? Unfortunately, this pandemic has played right into their hands. Because, we're not going to have minor league baseball this year. I don't think whatever baseball does with its major league teams, I can't imagine them having any minor league baseball. And minor league baseball is all dependent on their crowds, their attendance, their fans in the ballpark, and they're not going to have fans in the ballpark in the major leagues, at least to start. So, I can see cutting back. Years ago, when baseball was the only sport that you could really make any money at, Yankees at one time had 3 AAA teams, and they would have 12 to 15 minor league teams, and they had players everywhere because that's the only sport athletes could make any money at. But nowadays, most teams have 7, some have 8 minor league teams. I could see them dropping down to 5 minor league teams and not having as many filler players, just sign, $1,000 free agent signs just to fill out teams. Those guys are never going to play above A ball. And I think you could be more prudent in your scouting and development, bring in what you think are truly prospects, have them play together, and then you would have the ability to develop chemistry with those specific prospects as you have them play together.
You mentioned the word chemistry, and one thing I did fail to ask, and then I'm going to get to Brad Robinson's question, but one thing I did fail to ask, you said something, I read that in Milwaukee is where you learned some really good stuff about chemistry when you went to Milwaukee.
Yeah, that was in 1978. Sal Bando had gone there in 77. Larry Heisel had signed as a free agent there. And things were up and coming in Milwaukee. Harry Dalton was a terrific general manager. George Bamberger was the first-year manager there. And it was all about the development again. And when you think about it, They had Robin Yount as a youngster. They had Paul Molitor, who had signed out of Minnesota. They had Sixto Lezcano. They had Gorman Thomas. They had a bunch of homegrown talent. And then they complemented with guys like Don Money, Sal Bando, Cesar Cooper, Larry Heisel. And you could see the talent level rising of the homegrown talent. And I don't want to forget Jim Gantner, because he was a huge part of that as well. And, at one point we had 7 catchers in spring training. And
Wow.
it was Ray Fosse and myself and Andy Etchebarren and Larry Haney, Charlie Moore, Ned Yost. And we had guys that would catch a long time in the major leagues. But they were developing a huge stockpile of talent. And Sal Bando had a lot to do with implementing that philosophy, because he'd come from the A's. And the A's were the benchmark for winning in the early 70s. And Sal was there and given a lot of leeway by Bud Selig, who was then the owner. And Harry Dalton was a brilliant GM who'd come from the Orioles, who had developed the Oriole way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he brought George Bamberger from the Orioles, and all of that started to grow. And eventually, the Brewers, of course, played in the World Series in '82.
Brad Robinson from the beautiful city of Vancouver, Canada. I have the pleasure of going there a lot, working with players and coaches and parents. BC Baseball, one of the best baseball programs I've seen anywhere in the world. He asks, I'm wondering if you used anything in the mental part of the game to set you apart or give you an advantage.
Well, I never had an advantage. I was always a guy that always felt like every spring training for 17 years, I had to win a job in spring training. And that's why I played 6 years of winter ball after I got to the majors, to make sure that I was always learning, always getting an edge. So I would come to spring training, I was head and shoulders above everybody else as far as being ready for the season. So my first game, I was game ready as far as catching and throwing and hitting and everything else. So as far as gain an advantage mentally, I always felt like I didn't want anybody to outwork me, to outthink me, to outprepare me. And I have that same philosophy now in my broadcasting. And I broadcast twice as long as I have played. I've just finished my 34th year of broadcasting.
Wow.
And it's always been, I don't want anybody to take my job, because I like what I do. So I'm always working hard to improve what I do.
So your preparation prior to games as a catcher, prior to games as a broadcaster, your attention to detail, that's important to you.
Without question, it's everything, because you never know what's going to come up in the course of a game. So I can't sit here and say, Pete, tomorrow I'm going to do the Blue Jays and the Orioles, and I'm going to tell you this story in the 4th inning, because the game will take you where you need to go. You have to be prepared by having background information on the participants. I have to be able to say, I know everything about J.J. Hardy, and I know everything about Vernon Wells and Delgado. So if something happens, I will have a reason for why that happened, because I have talked to that particular player or his coach or his manager about what he has done lately to improve his game and how that might impact the situation. It was the same as a player. I mentioned Charlie Lau in my early days in Kansas City, 72, 3, 4, 5, and 6, when we finally became division champs. I would sit with Charlie for half an hour before the game, in between my at-bats during the game, and for an hour after the game, going over the game calling, what I did, what I could have done differently, and how I approached that game from a catcher's perspective.
You know, Coach Daryl Carrillo, from my good friend from New Mexico. I think he's still in New Mexico. He asks, can you ask Buck the definition and philosophy of the mental game, how he would express the mental game to young athletes coming up in the game? And folks, so you know, we got about 5 more minutes if you have any more questions.
Yeah, the mental game has become such a huge part of Major League Baseball now. They have mental coaches, they have mental skills coaches, they have psychologists, and if you got a problem, you go talk to one of these guys. Well, I would have never gone to a coach that worked for my team and told them I'm scared to death when I go out there. I mean, you're giving them information that you don't want anybody to know about.
Yeah.
But I know they say, well, we're going to help you with that. And what if they say, well, it's too bad we can't help him, they're going to release him. But as far as the mental skills coach, I think the biggest thing you can do is try to keep your player as comfortable and at ease in his work as he can possibly be. So if somebody is relaxed, no matter what you do, if you're a carpenter, a teacher, a painter, a baseball player, a football player, if you're relaxed and you're confidently prepared to do your job, you're going to perform better. There's no question about that. If you're going up against something you're not sure of, if you have doubts about the color of the house you're going to paint, or about whether or not this tool fits this job for the car repair you're about to do, you're going to have doubts and you're not going to prepare as well, and you're not going to perform the job as well. So that's why I was always maxed out of my preparation. And to me, that was my mental skill, was making sure that I didn't leave any stone unturned. And I had everything I needed to start that game. So if something come up during the course of the game, I could handle it because I was prepared.
You know, and that's probably one of the biggest questions we get on every show with every guest, you know, the toughest part, because that is the toughest part of the game. You know, you're going to fail. You're going to fail at hitting, you know, more times than not. You're going to fail a lot of different things. And it's tough for a coach to work with that player and understanding how to deal with that failure. When Buck Martinez failed at any level, what did you do to kind of keep yourself in a positive mode?
Well, it was difficult because I was never a very good hitter. So I was always, down on myself as a hitter.
Which means you could give great advice then, right?
But when you really break it down, and it wasn't until later in my career, I was a platoon player my whole career. And I got to Toronto and I platooned with Ernie Whitt. And my manager was Bobby Maddock before Bobby Cox came in 1982. And Maddock came up to me one day and said, "Hey, I've talked to Whitey Herzog about you," who was my manager in Kansas City. And he said, "Buck always was concerned about hitting for an average." He said, "He's not that type of hitter. Tell him to get on top of the plate, swing as hard as he can, try to hit the ball as hard as he can, and maybe he can do some damage," which was a great philosophy because as a backup catcher hitting only against left-handers, I was only going to get about 230 at-bats a season. So if I could do some damage and hit 15 or 20 doubles and 10 home runs, then I was really making a contribution. And that's what happened in 83 and 84. Ernie Whitt and I both had double-digit home runs, and we produced almost 100 RBIs while hitting about 30 home runs between us. Wow. So that was great advice, but that freed up my mind. I mean, as a kid hitter, Pete, I was a great hitting prospect. The scout that signed me said I was the best kid hitter he'd ever seen. I went out my first year and hit 357 in the Northwest League. And then I got sidetracked. I just lost that feel and I never hit the same, but I was supposed to be a good hitter. And I didn't have the discipline to stay to be that good hitter. But fortunately, I was able to play a long time in the big leagues.
Well, this is a message from just a message, not a question. Warren Phillip, he said, "Let Buck know the fans north of the border miss him," and Pat Tabler coming into our living rooms every day during the season on Jay's broadcast.
Well,
go ahead.
They miss me, that's for sure. And I've talked to Pat once a week at least. And yeah, we miss all the great fans. They treat us wonderfully from coast to coast in Canada. And hopefully before too long, we'll be back on the air bringing you some Blue Jays baseball.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, 6 decades in the game, all the experience you have, it's just incredible. And I'm sure the timing fell right when you became a broadcaster with all this experience. Take us back to some of the folks online that aren't familiar with this because you might be too young. The Kansas City Royals Academy. I'm familiar with it. And I know you kind of worked there or grew up in that area. Should we bring something like that back, or is that just something of the past?
Kansas City Royal Academy, to me, was the most innovative baseball thing that I've ever seen. And Ewing Kauffman was a very successful businessman in Kansas City. He was a self-made man. He developed a calcium tablet and turned that success into Marion Laboratories. When he bought the Royals in 1969 for $11 million, he had a board meeting, coaches, managers, staff, the whole organization. Gentlemen, we've just paid $11 million for players that nobody else wants. We have to decide how we can stock our organization with players that we want and everybody else wants. And that's the genesis of the Royals Academy. So the philosophy behind the academy was to take non-drafted athletes, put them into a baseball immersion program, and teach them how to play baseball. And it was a pure philosophy. They had tryout camps across the country. They had a coach named Buzzy Keller from Texas. They had a general manager named Sid Thrift, who had experience in the major leagues. They put together a coaching staff of terrific coaches that included Charlie Lau. It included some great coaches that had been in the big leagues. Tommy Henrik was involved early on. And they put all these kids in this academy in Sarasota, Florida. They built a state-of-the-art facility, Cloverleaf Diamonds, great clubhouse. They had a dorm. They stayed there. And from the tryouts they had across the country, I believe they signed 42 players. One of the first players that was signed, Ron Washington. Ron Washington went on to become a terrific major league player and, of course, a great major league manager, and now coaches for the Atlanta Braves. But what they did was they practiced baseball in the morning and played games in the afternoon. 3 days a week, they went to junior college. Ewing Kauffman felt it was important to teach them public speaking and finance. And they went to junior college. They got a free education. They got room and board. They got a chance to play, and they played games everywhere. Pete, you'll remember they played maybe 160, 175 games a year. And they emphasized physical ability, base running, base stealing, bunting. They had a unique way of teaching base stealing. Rodney Scott came out of the baseball academy. There were 14 major leaguers that were original signees of the Kansas City Royals Baseball Academy. Think about it. That's a pretty unique situation.
Absolutely.
Theoretically, non-drafted players. Frank White, we called him Academy Frank because he came from the academy. And Rodney Scott was a drafted player that they put in the academy to accelerate his development. But they taught great base stealing. They taught great fundamentals, and they practiced it over and over. And the fundamentals in the morning, games in the afternoon, every day. And that's how they got better. The reason it folded, because it was costing them $700,000 a year. And at the time, the Royals were an expansion baseball team. And Ewing Kauffman was bleeding money. They were not making much at the gate. The Royals were getting off to an expansion start, as you would expect. So one of the financial people at Ewing at Marion Laboratories came to him and said, Mr. Kauffman, we have to make a decision. Either the baseball academy has to go or you have to sell the baseball team. And he said, well, let's sell the baseball team. And then the gentleman said, well, if you do that, you have no reason for the baseball academy.
Wow.
So the baseball academy, I believe, only lasted 4, maybe 5 years, but it was a terrific idea.
You know, and I know we're taking a little longer because this is very good, and we're almost finished. The reminds me, I spent 10 years at Make-Your-Own Baseball School in Springfield, Missouri, near Springfield, Missouri, where it was all about playing, practicing all day. There was no television. We had no pools, nothing. It was fun. We started 15 years old. But now, we went, all of a sudden, we made a full cycle. We got the money ball, and things kind of changed.
Yeah. Now they're all about coaching and techniques and indoor batting cages and all this stuff. The game, when you think about the great players today, Pete, the majority of the great players are Latin players. The Latin players play games, whether it's with a broomstick and a Coke bottle, a Coke cap, or a string ball. They play games. They know how to put the bat on the ball. Nobody's thinking launch angle. They're playing the game. In Mexico, they play sandlots. In Venezuela, I played 2 years in Venezuela. There was a game on every street corner. Kids were playing with a stick. In the 50s and 60s, kids played stickball in the United States. Now there's nobody playing on the sandlots. You don't see pickup games anywhere. We used to play one-eyed cat. We'd play 3-on-2, right field, you're out. You can't hit it to right field. You have to hit it to left field. All types of creative games to help you with your skills. Now, everything is about, you can't play in high school unless you play on this travel team. And if you can't walk on to high school. What if Mike Trout walked into your high school as a junior and said, I want to play baseball? Oh, you can't play because you didn't play on the travel team.
Right.
That's so ridiculous. It makes me
crazy.
You can't play football because you have to play on the winter baseball team. Just think, Bo Jackson might have never played baseball. if they win
Exactly.
football. And it's like, what are we doing? Kirk Gibson, Rick Leach, all these great players. Other sports teach you other skills. And I believe that if you play baseball 12 months a year, you never allow your body to recuperate and heal, especially as a youngster. It is absolutely ludicrous for a high school coach to tell a young freshman, oh, where have you been? Maybe he didn't want to play until he was a freshman. Maybe he's Mark Burley. Mark Burley got cut from his high school team until he was a senior. Larry Boa, a borderline Hall of Famer, never played high school ball because he kept getting cut because he was too small. We don't know who the next great player is going to be. So don't tell me you have to play on my $1,000 travel team in order to play on my high school team. That's not fair to the kids.
Absolutely. Well said. Amen. Love it. And finally, Buck, that was awesome. Okay. Last word to parents, coaches, and players when it comes to developing young players in the game. And you brought up some great points. Anything else that you just want to leave everybody with some wisdom?
Well, I think the one thing is, and we don't want to discourage people from coaching. We want to encourage people from coaching because you make an impact on people. And as Pete, as you mentioned, I remember my 8-year-old Little League coach, Johnny Crotto. He had a lasting impact on me, and you coaches have a lasting impact on the players that you coach. And I think what you need to do is to remember that you're building character. You're not building a baseball player, you're building character. You're building a citizen for the future. You're building somebody that has to learn how to fail. The greatest minds in the world have been told they can't do something over and over and over again. The richest people in the world have been bankrupt multiple times because they would never accept the fact that what they believed in couldn't really work. So you have to remember, you're not coaching the next Mike Trout. You're coaching the next citizen. You're coaching the next character guy. You're coaching somebody that might be a teacher of your grandchildren. Remember to build them up. They get torn down enough in regular life. Your job as a coach is to encourage them to pursue what their dreams might be.
Fantastic. What a way to end the show. And I love the part you said, learn to fail. They just don't allow our kids to learn to fail and learn from it. Buck Martinez, can't thank you enough, man. That was awesome. It's been a long time seeing you. Hope to see you somewhere, either in the U.S. or around the world.
You betcha, Pete. Great to be with you, and good luck to you, and congratulations on your great job with this.
I appreciate it, folks. That's Buck Martinez, and I want to thank him on behalf of everybody listening on live on Facebook and Zoom. Folks, I want to thank you all for listening to the show and watching the show. And if you missed it, or if you want to go back and listen, it's going to be on YouTube at Peter Caliendo. Check us out at Baseball Outside the Box. The audio will be on podcast. Also, our Twitter at Baseball Out. Special thanks to Buck Martinez. Also, our producer, Brian Kroc, Lineup Media Group. Check it out, lineupmediagroup.com. And the final thanks to our listeners. You guys are fantastic. Keep spreading the show. It really, if you can just get it out on your social media, forward it to all your coaches, players, and parents at all different levels in the game, we would be very appreciative. It just gets the knowledge out. Fantastic show. Remember, it's the show that loves to interview baseball's best coaching minds who love to challenge the status quo. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo, and we will see you on the next show.